Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast. I am your host, Janet Sandberg, and my guest today is Deborah and I messed it up. Deborah LeBlanc, all the way from Louisiana. So she's on the opposite side of the country from me. Welcome, Deborah. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so looking forward to hearing your story. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm from Lafayette, Louisiana, which is right in the heart of Cajun country. I was born and raised here, and I am a keynote speaker, an author, and a clinical hypnotherapist.
Interesting. We'll get more into that later. But why don't we go back to the beginning of your story and tell us why you're here on the podcast. What was going on in your life when you were having suicidal ideations and or not feeling like you wanted to be here with us?
Well, there were a couple of incidents. My first was I was raised by an emotionally and physically abusive mother. My parents divorced when I was 8 years old. And my mother, I always described her as she was an explosion always waiting to happen. So I protected my siblings from her. And, she didn't spank. She beat. And I wore long sleeve pants and shirts to school throughout the school year because I just didn't want people to see my bruises. And I was already extremely shy kid, very much to myself, and going through the teasing at school simply because of what I wore was in and of itself bullying. So I was like, I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't type thing. Well, my mother was addicted to prescription medications. She would doctor up. Back then, they didn't have it all computerized where you could tell, what doctor you've been to and what prescriptions you've taken. So she would jump from doctor to doctor and take things like painkillers, Xanax, anything that would help her not feel. She was pretty much addicted to that most of my childhood. And so I went through her beatings, her telling me things like, I hate you and wish you were dead. She would use me to try to get money from my father, my father was my best friend. I adored him and we were pretty close. And one day she drove me over to his place and she said, he was outside. And she said, I want you to go over there and tell him this. If he doesn't give you the money, you tell him you're not a father, you're a son of a bitch. And my jaw dropped because, this was my dad, who I adored. And she just she saw my face and she just grabbed my arm and dug her fingernails into my arm and said, and if you don't say it exactly like that, I'll kill you.
My goodness. How old were you?
At that time, I was 10.
My goodness.
I was 10 years old. So that was the crux of my childhood. And I was around 13 years old. And one day I got off the school bus. My brother rode a later bus than I did. And my baby sister, she's 10 years younger than I am, was at a sitter, so my mother picked her up at the end of her work shift. And I got off the school bus one day. The kids had been teasing me. I had been beaten the night before, so I was pretty black and blue and hurting, from it. Not hurting emotionally. I pretty much learned to kind of turn that off. I got to the point where there was no emotion, there was no crying, there was nothing. When she'd beat me, I would just go blank.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more I turned it off, the harder she would beat me. So she said she wanted me to cry. She wanted me to. So I faked it. I just faked crying and the whole 9 yards. Well, I got off the school bus one day and this isn't something I thought about all day. I just got off the bus knew I had to head into that household and thought, I can't do this anymore. I can't. Now, at 13 years old, she had me working at a donut shop from 11 at night till 7 in the morning. And the little bit of money that I'd earned from that, she would take from me to pay bills, to pay an electric bill. Yeah, my weekly pay was maybe $40.
Sure.
So I was working all night. I would come back to get ready for school, get my siblings ready for school, get to school. When I got back, I had to clean the house, make sure supper was ready. Then I was able to get a couple of hours of sleep before the whole cycle started again. Well, I got back one day and I thought, I can't do this anymore. And very calmly, I walked into the house, went into the bathroom and into her closet. She had a linen closet in there, and that's where she kept all of her meds. And there were bottles of it, of everything you could name.
Yeah.
And so I just started taking everything I could find. And I would cap the bottles back and put them back on the shelf. It's not like I wanted to die and then have somebody figure out what I'd done and pump my stomach. I didn't want that to happen. So I would take everything in the bottle, cap it back, put it back in the closet. And the last thing I remember taking, which was the last thing was to take, was 100 aspirin.
My God.
And altogether, I took about 400 pills. And the next thing I remember after, taking the aspirin, the only thing I remember after that was the sound of my neighbor's voice. And I could hear her saying, we're going to have to call her mom. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm thinking in my mind that I can hear this conversation going on with somebody. My neighbor's talking to somebody, and I can feel that I'm laying in bed. So I'm thinking, if I'm not dead now, if my mother gets called in from work and has to come home because of me, I'll be dead. She'll finish the job. So I wanted to let my neighbor know, no, I'm okay. Nothing's going on. And I couldn't speak. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't utter a sound. It was like I was paralyzed.
Yeah.
And I would go in and out. I'd hear my neighbor's voice. And then the next voice I'm hearing, and I don't know how much time had passed, was my mother's voice. And I'm thinking, I'm done, I'm done for. And so I'm thinking, okay, if I can just get up and just start cooking supper, at least she won't be as mad. So, and again, I can't move my hand. I can't move my eyelids, nothing. So I'm hearing my mother telling my neighbor they're going to call Dr. So-and-so who lived about 2 blocks away and it was a friend of my mother's. In the midst of this on again, off again, twilight, whatever I was in, I heard her say, we're going to call the doctor in. The doctor comes in. I hear his voice. And he's saying, he starts pressing on my stomach, and that's all I felt was him pressing on my stomach. And I remember a groan coming out of my mouth. And he said, I heard him say, I think it's probably her menstrual cycle. I'm going to give her a shot of Demerol. Oh. In that moment, I remember thinking, if he gives me a shot of Demerol, I am dead. After all I'd taken, I am dead. And something clicked inside of me. As much as I wanted to die and take all the pills that I've taken, in that second, something switched inside of me, and I didn't want to die. I wanted to live. It was almost like a sensation of I was trying to take something that really didn't belong to me. I was on this earth for a reason, and it certainly wasn't to be my mother's punching bag. I didn't know what the reason was, but I didn't have a right to take this life. I felt that so strongly. I didn't have a right to take this life. And the next thing I feel, I'm trying so desperately to say something, tell this doctor, don't give me a shot. And the next thing I feel is the needle going into my hip. Now, everything went black after that. And I woke up. It was 3 days later. I woke up 3 days later. I was wearing the same clothes I had been in the day I'd done it. I'd taken all the pills. I was in the same clothes. I opened my eyes and looked around my room, and it looked to be around midday. I was home alone. So evidently my mother had gone to work. My siblings were at school and at the sitters, and I was home alone and thinking, I'm not dead. I'm just can't believe this. I'm not dead. I sat up and my head is spinning, and I sat up and I looked down at my clothes, and it was covered with this white granule stuff. It looked like sugar or salt. And it was all over my blouse. I was wearing jeans. It was over my jeans. And I looked on the side of me, and I could see the outline of my body with this white granule stuff on the bed. And I got out of bed, stumbled my way into the restroom, and just remember drinking out of the faucet, and then just drinking and drinking and drinking. And the best thing I can relate to what happened was my body had somehow sweat out all of these toxins in my body, and it was literally salt from my body that was covering my clothes and covering the outline of that bed. That was my first attempt. Ever since then, I'd learned, I'd heard, people that attempted suicide. For example, they jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. Only 1% of the people that jump off the bridge survive. And out of that 1%, all of them that were interviewed said that at the moment they jumped, the problems that they had at that time seemed minuscule. And what they were about to do, what they had just done, was irreparable. Fortunately, there were the few that survived. But I never forgot that. But so life goes on. I wind up getting married at 16. I wasn't pregnant. I got married at 16 and had my first daughter at 18. And as time goes on, I'm realizing I am married to a narcissistic ass and happened to be the male version of my mother.
Sure.
He wasn't physically abusive, but he was verbally and emotionally abusive. Mm-hmm. So life goes on. I'm going to school. I'm working at the same time, trying to raise my children. I had 2 other daughters after that, and just trying to juggle life. But even though I was young, I was 18 years old when I had my first daughter, I had been raising children since I was 8. I'm raising my siblings, taking care of the household, cooking, cleaning, blah, blah, blah. So it wasn't like this all new to me. So, I'm going to cut out this long story short, that I wound up divorcing this man, and my daughters were grown, and I wound up divorcing him, and was able to got my education, was able to go to college, put myself through college. And, fortunately, the university's life is so different than high school, where everybody's teasing you, picking at you. University, everybody's eclectic. So, we're all in the same weird boat, just in our own way. So I got my education. I was able to work my way up to become the first executive vice president in transportation in the U.S., first female.
Wow.
In the U.S. And I took my whole experience, my childhood experience, my married experience, my near-death experience, and said, I'm put here on this planet for a reason, and I got to find out what that reason is.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for this company for about 12 years before I left that company and started my own. a logistics company. It was the first one like it. I was the first one to create it. And so worked at that for a number of years. My youngest daughter wound up getting pregnant by, guess what, a narcissistic ass. And fortunately, they were not married. I don't say fortunately, but she had a beautiful, beautiful little girl. And that baby was just the apple of my eye. I adored her. And she was autistic. And at 3 years old, it was 1 month after her third birthday, she passed away.
Oh, I'm so
And
sorry.
I thought I had been through a lot of stuff in my life, but that was the worst.
Yeah.
That was seemingly the worst. 4 months later, her mama, my youngest daughter, gets killed in a fiery car crash.
Mm.
And a year after that, my middle daughter dies from her body shut down. She died from alcoholism and at a very young age. And as much as we tried, she was actually in AA. She was doing really well, but her sponsor committed suicide. And that caused her to just fall off the wagon.
Yeah.
And relapse. And in a big way. And after all of that death, it was only a couple of months later, my younger brother died of lung cancer. And then my father died a month after he did, after my brother did. I just thought, this is too much pain. All of this death, this is just too much pain, and I can't deal with much. So I went to a hotel. And with me, I had a prescription of 122 milligram bars of Xanax, 90 tablets of 5 milligram Ambien. And just for kicks, I stopped and bought a big box of Benadryl. And so I went into the hotel room, wrote a note to my employees, my managers, to let them know what needed to be done. Wrote a note even to the maid that was at the hotel, letting her, if there's a mess, I apologize for it. And wrote a note to my oldest daughter, she was all I had left. And I held a picture of my grandbaby in my hand, along with a little crocheted butterfly that someone had given me at her funeral. And I took all of these pills. Again, a pill. I'm popping them. I took them all. I laid down on the bed, and just covered myself up and just went to sleep. Don't you know, I wake up 14 hours later. I woke up, and I remember sitting up on the edge of the bed and going, you've got to be shitting me. I mean, how many people do you hear have taken 2 pills and they're dead? I'm taking 122 milligram bars of Xanax, 90 Ambien, and then all of these Benadryl tablets. I mean, come on. Well, after that, it was like, okay, it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. Well, it was then that I decided, you know what, I've yet to find my full purpose in life. This is the second go around. He didn't take me. And so there's something I'm not catching here. Mm-hmm. I sold my company and went back to school and got my master's in mind body psychology. Went through a 2-year program for clinical hypnotherapy. So I was able to, and became also a life coach. So I was able to move my life toward helping other people that were going through the same things that I had gone through. Yeah. And that's where my life lit up. That's where the light came on. I found the most wonderful man on the planet, who I've been with now for 16 years. And I couldn't ask for, I would have missed all of that. Had it happened. So, the saying that goes there, but by the grace of God go I. The 2 shots at it, 2 serious attempts, and nothing. well, then you know, okay, it's time to pay attention. What am I supposed to be doing in this life? And that's how I wound up where I am today.
Amazing. I hear, obviously, every week, I hear a lot of stories about all the struggles that people go through and everything, but I think your story has probably the most, grief and loss in it. And I've lost, my sister and my mother, and but not so many people in such a short period of time that were so close to me. And I can't even imagine, like, I know what it's like to lose them sort of one at a time with some time to heal in between. And I can't even imagine having all of that compounded and not knowing what to do, like, with all of that. And what you do is you help others. And
Yes.
yeah. And I get that. There's a saying somewhere that, great pain and struggle will sort of either take you to one extreme or another. Either you'll be completely miserable or you'll be super compassionate. And obviously you're the second kind, where we take the struggles and everything that we've been through, and we use that experience to help others who are going through the same thing so they don't have to be alone. Yeah, I'm sorry that you had to go through all of that, but I thank you for using it for the greater good and for helping other people. And yeah, this world is just always full of surprises.
It is that.
It's also interesting that this might sound weird, but you had your first attempt when you were younger using pills, which didn't work, but you chose that again the second time. And so,
Yes.
like, why would it work the second time if it didn't work the first time?
Well, I think I figured the first time at 13, I knew I was taking painkillers and what they called nerve pills back then.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure the names of the stuff that I was taking. I wasn't sure of any of that. I just knew it paralyzed me for a while. But I was older and knew exactly what I was taking. Yeah. So I knew, if I'm taking this much Xanax and taking this many Ambien,
yeah, you're just meant to be here.
That's it. I figured that out the hard way. But, now my life it's when I do get that chance to help people, when I see, I'll give a speech or give a keynote address, and I see some members of the audience, they're crying. It's like they're relieved to hear somebody else understands where I'm at. Somebody else has gone through it and they really understand. I thought I was alone in all this.
Yes.
I can't count the number of times that I've had that happen where people will come up to me afterwards and say, well, they'll say a couple of things. I've had women that have come up to me and said, I was considering killing myself tonight after this event. But because of your story, I'm not.
Amazing. And that's why we share the stories. That's why we have to talk about it. So that, everybody knows, we can, as humans, survive amazingly terrible things and create amazingly good things afterwards. But I do want to ask, so you were in logistics and then you chose hypnotherapy. Like, how did that happen? Like, what made you
the story gets weirder.
Okay.
The story gets weirder. I'm sitting at my computer one day and I had sold my company and I'd been kind of floating around. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was looking for, that avenue I needed to travel, and I wasn't quite sure what it was. But I'm sitting in my computer and there was a project I was working on, and I needed to find out how much gravel I needed to cover a 1 mile stretch of driveway, of roadway. So I'm Googling this. And the first thing that pulls up is HMI, which is the Hypnosis Motivational Institute. It was the first accredited hypnotherapy university in the United States.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, what is the hypnotherapy college selling gravel? What is this? So, and I mean, right below it are gravel companies, the names of gravel companies, and then there's calculations of things that what's what I was looking for. But something in my, it's like a little flag went up in my brain. It said, let me check this out. And I clicked on that and I started going through, the curriculum that they had, the different programs that they had. And the more I went through it, the faster my heart started beating. And I was getting goosebumps. And I said, my gosh, what is this? And how do I get involved? And a month later, I was enrolled. I went through their 2-year program. Janet, it was like I had done this before.
Wow.
I mean, I graduated in the top 3 in my class of 237 students. But it was so easy. It's like I was just taking a refresher course, like I had done it before. And when I started connecting with clients, we do, I did 3,300 pro bonos before I graduated.
Oh my gosh.
And they have a program there where people who are in financial need can go to them and see some of their advanced students for free. And so as many pro bonos as they would get in, I'd say, just give me as many as you have, as many as you want to give me. I was going to school and seeing pro bono sometimes till 8:00 at night. But it just came so naturally to me and so easily to me that I knew this is where I fit. And it was just one arm of the whole thing that wound up being my life. It was just one arm, but it's what got me headed in that direction, was that one Google search that wound up pulling up HMI.
Amazing.
Or gravel. I know.
Huh.
How weird is that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I've not had weirder things happen to me in life, okay? But that was something.
Sometimes the answers are just placed right in your lap, and
they are.
You just have to take the initiative to take action on them.
Yeah. Hypnotherapy was
easily just ignored it and been like, I'm looking for gravel.
I know. What is this doing here? And hypnotherapy is not something prevalent in this area. It's not like we have hypnotherapists around every corner. That's more something, a lot of hypnotherapists in California, there are a lot in the Midwest even, and in the Northeast in New York and New Jersey, but not down south.
Yeah.
They're rare. So it was odd because it's not something I ever thought about or ever considered doing.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a very young girl, there were 3 things I wanted to be in life. I either wanted to be a nun, Superman, or a psychiatrist. So when I sold my company and I started looking,
very different things.
Very different things. But they all help people.
Yes. Yeah.
They all help people.
And that's what you're doing now. Amazing. What words of advice would you give somebody who is currently in a low spot?
Don't give up hope. Tomorrow Even though you look at today and you're thinking all of your tomorrows are going to look the same way, they're not. They're all different. And sometimes you're the catalyst that makes the difference. You can make the difference. Thinking of ending your life, when you think of the finality of that, you might think you're getting rid of pain, but in that second, when it happens, in that second, it's not the way to go. There are whole things operating in this universe that we're not aware of that take us in different directions and different roads. And the best things that have happened to me happened after all of that drama, all of that pain and suffering. And now I'm living the fullest life I've ever lived. And then I would have missed out on all of that. I would have missed out.
Yeah. And that's, we say that here often on the podcast, that, you know, when everything seems dark and terrible, it seems and it feels like that's just how it's always going to be. All of us who have been on this podcast are proof that that's not true. And there's a saying that says the only way out is through. And I would like to amend that and say the best way out is through.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's very true. I mean, if I can go through what I did and survive,
yes,
and live a full, happy life now, that's a testament that anybody, no matter how tough your situation is, can have the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, you definitely went through it in all the ways.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here today, for sharing your story and hope and wisdom and inspiration. I appreciate you.
I appreciate what you do, Janet. Your podcast is so important, and it serves such a purpose on this planet. Don't stop, please. There's so many people that need to hear your voice and the voices of your guests that share moments of hope. Just keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are valuable, you are meant for more, and that it really does get better. If you are in crisis, there are numbers that you can call or text to get the help that you need. That information for Canada and the US is in the description below each episode. If you are in immediate crisis, please call 911. We love you, and I hope you'll listen again.